Exceptionally, today I'm going to read a paper. As Barbara told me, you don't like it last time. I was just talking offhand. But I try to do it in a better way. So first of all, I wish to express my sincere thanks to co-chairs, Anne and Barbara, and to my good friend Sanjot, coordinator for the Asian Arts of Asia lecture series of this fall, for giving me this opportunity to present these two talks. I am also much thankful to Sanjot and the Dung Hong Foundation for giving me a wonderful location to visit Mogao and Yulin Caves in Dung Hong, which opened my eyes. The present study, based on research in museums and fieldwork in ancient site, would not have been possible without the generous support of the Trong Lam Research Fund of Central Asian Art and Archaeology, established by Richard Bellison and Kim Lam Bellison at the Center for Buddhist Studies at UC Berkeley. I wish to express my gratitude to both of them. It gives me a great pleasure to be with you again and to talk about this subject which interests me immensely. During the first talk, you can switch off the lights if you want to, right? During the first talk, I wish to discuss the diffusion of Indian, very particularly Gandharan motifs along the Silk Roads to Bamiyan in Afghanistan, Kisil Caves in Xinjiang, and to Dung Hong in northwestern Gansu province in western China. The second talk examines the origin and development of the Beriban diadem, also known as fluttering ribbons or flying streamers, emanating behind the heads of the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, gods, nobles, and traders on the paintings of Bamiyan, Kisil, and Dung Hong. It would be an understatement to say that the Buddhism was introduced to China at a very early date by enthusiastic traveling monks who may have accompanied traders and caravaneers. Not only Buddhist philosophy, but also Buddhist iconography were transmitted along the Silk Roads to Buddhist centers in the Tarim Basin, Xinjiang, and Gansu. While the borrowings from the Indian models are obvious in Chinese mural paintings, it appears clear that they developed in a cross-fertilized context representing local traditions and savoir-faire. Both maritime and inland trade brought peoples of many cultures, languages, beliefs, and aesthetic aspirations together. Traders were, to a certain extent, the mediators of these cultural interactions because Buddhist monks, nuns, philosophers, artists, and diplomats as well traveled together, and as a result, not only the goods, but also philosophical thoughts and iconographics were exchanged. The events related to the life of Gautama Buddha, or stories of his previous births known as Jatakas, were mainly of Indian origin, but their iconographic rendering in a Chinese context have additions and omissions corresponding to the taste of the donors who commissioned them and of the artists who visualized them. Let me give you one example to demonstrate my argument. Though not as popular as Vesantara Jataka, the Sibi Jataka holds a special place in Buddhist art. As narrated in Jatakamala, the king Sibi was known for his philanthropy. One day, Indra, the supreme god, and Brahma, the creator, came to test the limits of the king's generosity. The two gods disguised themselves as a hawk and a pigeon. The hawk started chasing the pigeon, and the pigeon fell on King Sibi's lap, trembling with fear. The hawk demanded that the king surrender the pigeon as it was its prey. The king refused, saying that the pigeon had sought his protection. After much argument, the hawk agreed to leave the pigeon alone if the king offered a piece of flesh from his own body which was equivalent to the weight of the pigeon. The king was more than happy to make such a sacrifice. Strangely, after endless slicing of his flesh and placing it on the scale, the king found that he could not equal the weight of the pigeon. The king threw his entire body on the scale, and even then the scale tipped in favor of the pigeon. At this point, the hawk and the pigeon revealed their true identity and praised the king for his abundant charitable spirit. Pious traders who sponsored these sumptuous mural paintings to acquire merits may have preferred this type of story where the ultimate sacrifice of the Buddha to be, meaning Bodhisattva, is well idealized. The panel from Gandhara, now in the British Museum in London, datable to the 2nd century CE, is one of the earliest depictions of the Sibijataka. The center of this panel is taken over by the Brahmin who holds a steelyard scale or counterweight balance of the Greek type. Such scales were found in Gandhara, where the Greeks were present for over 300 years. Less importance is given to the king, who is depicted in the left corner of the scene. His pain is highlighted by the presence of his queen, who holds him affectionately. Two gods, Indra and Brahma, who have revealed their true identity, are given an important place. The same story is depicted differently in the cave number 1 of Ajanta, dated approximately to the 5th century CE. The painter of Ajanta does not portray the slicing off of the king's flesh. Instead, the priority is given to the King Sibi receiving the pigeon, trembling with fear, and the king climbing on to one of the sets of the balance scales. Indra and Brahma are not shown here. A petroglyph on the bank of the Indus River in Gilgit in Pakistan, dated to the 4th century CE, depicts the story of Sibi giving the priority to the slicing of the flesh. The innovations are made here. The first is that it is not Bodhisattva as king of Sibi who is portrayed here, but the Buddha himself wearing a samgati, meaning the overrobe. Secondly, it is he himself who cuts his own flesh from his leg. The balance engraved on the rock surface is there to remind us of the rest of the story. Let us have a look at a painting from the cave number 114 at Kizil, which is almost contemporary to the Ajanta painting discussed earlier. On this painting, King Sibi is in the center. The pigeon chased by the hawk flying into the arms of the king, a servant slicing his flesh, and an attendant holding the scale to weigh the flesh of the king are the only figures depicted. The choice of the main protagonist related to the story is remarkable compared to the Ajanta painting, where multitude of figures unnecessarily crowds the space. The mural painting of the Sibijataka in the cave 254 of the Mogao Cave Complex in Dung Hong follows the iconography of the Kisil painting, giving the priority to King Sibi. The pigeon, the servant slicing the flesh from the leg, and the one holding the scale are also depicted, but in a less animated manner. The queen and the courtesans making gestures with grief-stricken faces dramatize the pain of the king. These several examples from Central, South and South Asian countries show how the same story is portrayed differently, respecting the social, cultural, and artistic tendencies of the respective regions. As we all know, we mean by Gandharan art a form of figurative sculpture born in the Gandharan region between the 2nd and the 5th century CE. Gandharan art has a direct relationship mainly with Buddhism and partly with Hinduism, as they flourished in India during the Kushan Empire and reflects regional cross-cultural elements. In relation to other forms of figurative art depicting the Buddha, particularly in Amaravati, the capital of Satavahanas, and Nagarjuna Konda, the capital of Vishwakus in Andhra Pradesh, and in Mathura on the right bank of Yamuna River. Buddhist art in Gandhara is characterized by a unique style, the use of schist readily available in the region, a naturalism reminiscent of Greek classical art, and an iconographic reference for episodes of the historical Buddha's life. When West met East, new forms of new art were born, and the Buddhism provided new grounds for innovative artistic expression. The presence of Greeks in an area since the conquest of Alexander the Great is an important historical fact. Through these interactions, a new composite art characterized by its singularity was born in Gandhara. As Dr. Sanjot Mehendale has well explained in an inaugural talk, the Silk Road, deriving its name from the lucrative Asian silk, was an ancient network of trade routes that connected the East and West. From the Mediterranean world, the overland steppe route crossed the northern steppes of Central Eurasia to the Fergana Valley, and then across the Tarim Basin to the Hexi Corridor to China proper. The unification of Central Asia and North India within the Kushan Empire in the 1st to 3rd centuries reinforced the role of the powerful merchants from Bactria and Taxila. They fostered multicultural interactions as indicated by the diffusion of Gandharan art from Gandharan art forms highly inspired by Hellenistic art. Last year, when discussing the Gandharan art in a cross-fertilized context, as Peter said, I have selected a stucco sculpture from Greater Gandhara, presumably from the Wardak region in Afghanistan, depicting the cry of agony of a monk. It is quite probable, even in the absence of the rest of the body and the context, the sculpture represents a Buddhist monk lamenting over the death of the Blessed One, as we call in Sanskrit Mahaparinirvana or Mahaparinibbana in Pali, showing the Hellenistic inspiration over the Gandharan Buddhist art. The polychrome of the sculpture has deteriorated with the passing of time, and one has to imagine the power of the facial expressions with the color effects. The agonizing monk immediately reminds us of the layman half bare-chested, dressed in a lower garment and uttariya, draped around the left shoulder and arm, seated in a half-kneeling position, raising his right hand towards the Buddha's deathbed, and keeping the left over the chest in sorrow, lamenting in agony and despair over the death of the Blessed One, depicted on the relief from Victoria and Albert Museum. In the light of the powerful iconography of this sculpture, depicting the utmost agony of Buddha's followers, we can assume that the stucco sculpture depicts a Buddhist monk, a faithful disciple, weeping in sorrow, seeing his master passing away. The modeling is vigorous. The teeth of the upper jaw emphasize the cry of despair. Unlike the middle figure in the sculpture from the Victoria and Albert Museum, whose tongue is depicted below the teeth of the upper jaw, on the stucco sculpture, the mouth is void of a tongue, and the effect of the teeth is thus more striking. His sadness is also conveyed by the expressive and staring eyes demarcated by curling and prominent thin eyebrows. Among the Hellenistic sculptures, which may have directly or indirectly inspired the sculptures under discussion, we may cite the famous statue of Laocoon, the Trojan priest, and his sons, known as the Laocoon group, excavated in Rome in 1506, now in the Vatican Museum. The group has called prototypical icon of human agony in Western art. For R.R.R. Smith, this sculpture, with its anguished rhetorical suffering, remains one of the most finest examples of Hellenistic high Baroque. The sculpture represents the Trojan priest, Laocoon and his sons, attacked at an altar by two giant snakes sent by Poseidon to prevent the Trojan priest, who intended to warn the Trojans not to trust the wooden horse left by the retreating Greeks. This type of iconography, directly or indirectly, traveled up to Dung Hong. The most famous depiction comes from the cave number 158 of Mogao, known as the Nirvana cave, which features a large reclining Buddha that covers the entire length of the hall. The figures of mourners in murals witnessing the passing away of the Buddha are depicted along the length of the hall behind the Buddha. The utter despair of the Trojan priest, faced with his own death, is the precursor of the passionate and emotional expressions of the agonizing Buddhist monk of the stucco sculpture from Wardak region, pain-stricken layman on the sculpture from the Victoria and Albert Museum, and the Arhat from Mogao cave number 158, sorrowing over the death of his beloved master. In Greek and Roman art, Atlas, kneeling with the celestial sphere, weighing heavily on his shoulder, is attested in many forms, and the Farnese Atlas, a 2nd century Roman marble, copy of a Hellenistic sculpture of the 2nd century BCE, holds a very special place. Atlas labors under the weight because he had been sentenced by Zeus, the supreme god, to hold up the sky. However, in Gandharan art, as surviving stupas at Taxila and Hadda show, the Atlantis are often depicted balancing the architectural elements or on a continuous horizontal alignment beneath and between architectural elements. The frieze found in Hadda by the French and Afghan archaeologists, now in the Paris Musée Guimet, is one good example. The cave number 272, dated between 410-440, as confirmed by the radiocarbon analysis, is considered one of the earliest grottos of the Dungong Mogao complex. And it has Atlantis type of figures holding the architectural structures or sitting beneath them. They remind us of Hadda frieze eloquently. Let me draw your attention to the sun god, or Helios in Greek, or Surya in Sanskrit, depicted above the Buddha's niche of the largest and best preserved cave from Western Wei dynasty in Mogao cave complex. This cave number 285 was constructed between 538 and 39 as evidenced by a precisely dated inscription found inside the cave. The sun god rides a wheeled chariot driven by 4 horses, known as quadriga in Greek context. The horses are harnessed as pairs running in opposite directions. It is worth examining whether this depiction comes from a highly Hellenized Gandharan context or from an Indian context, or if not, from syncretic context, meaning both Greek and Indian. According to the Greek tradition, Helios, one of the Titans, son of Hyperion and Theia, was the personification of the sun, and his sisters were the goddess Selene, meaning the moon, and Eos, meaning the dawn. He drove the chariot across the sky on a daily basis as it was pulled by 4 horses. Although Helios was a Titan, but not an Olympian god, he is depicted in many forms of Greek art. For example, we may take into consideration Helios on the Athenian red figure crater dated to the 5th century BCE, or Helios driving the quadriga at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. His popularity can also be seen on the coins issued by Plato, the Bactrian king of Central Asia, who reigned around the 2nd century BCE. The oldest so far known depiction of Indian Surya, sun god, is engraved on the old stone railing that once enclosed Mahabodhi temple in Bodh Gaya, where Buddha was illuminated or enlightened. Surya stands frontally in a chariot drawn by 4 horses. The sun god is flanked by 2 female figures with bows and arrows, representing Usha and Pratyusha. So Banerjee and Nagar pointed out that the 2 male busts, one of each side of the relief, personify darkness. The stunning relief at the Baja Vihara or Baja Caves near Pune in the Western Ghats similarly illustrate Surya riding in a chariot between his 2 wives. So this is the cave that I want to draw your attention. So on our left hand side, you can see the chariot tramples the monstrous body of a demon, which I have identified as the knight. So here is the knight, the monster. Both reliefs portray the sun driving away the darkness. These images, dating to the Sunga period, that means 2nd century BCE, are among the earliest representations of Surya found in South Asia, and strangely enough, both are located at Buddhist sites. Both iconographies discussed so far do not follow to the letter the sacred Indian texts. According to the Rig Veda, Surya's chariot is drawn by 1, 7, or an infinite number of horses. The 7 horses are only shown in late iconographies, like the sculpture of unrecorded origin, undoubtedly grace a temple of some importance in Bihar, in eastern India, dated to the 10th century CE, now in the Victoria and Albert Museum. At the feet of Surya is depicted his half-brother, the charioteer, Aruna, and his lower register are the 7 horses and Surya's chariot, here represented by a single-spoked wheel and all the horses face left, a unique configuration. The depiction of sun god closest to the one from the cave number 285 of the Mogao caves at Dunghong comes from Gandhara. On this Corinthian capital, the sun god, more like Indian in his attire, stands in the middle of the 2-wheeled chariot holding a scepter or a torch. The 2 women, dressed in Greek attire, driving the chariot could be his 2 wives, Usha and Pratyusha, representing the dawn. The horses are harnessed as pairs running in opposite directions, like on the Dunghong painting. None identified the presence of 2 wives on the mural painting of Dunghong. So, the image of Surya, both in Gandharan and Dunghong, is syncretic, meaning both Indian and Greek. It is Greek because the god rides a quadriga, a chariot driven by 4 horses, but not a chariot with 7 horses. It is Indian because the presence of Usha and Pratyusha, his wives. So the depictions are not entirely Greek, no Indian, but Gandharan. It should be underlined that before the Surya image traveled as far as Dunghong in northwestern Gansu province in western China, it appears in Bamiyan and many other places along the Silk Road. The sun god, a syncretic image symbolizing the Greek Helios, the Iranian Mitra, and Indian Surya, standing on a chariot pulled through the sky by white horses, is painted in the niche located directly over the 38-meter Buddha destroyed in 2002. There are reminiscences of many other Greek motifs on the mural paintings of Kisil and Dunghong paintings. Let us take one example. The Greek key motif, also known as labyrinth pattern or the meander motif, appears on the ceiling of the cave number 3 of the Yulin complex. The name has derived from the river Meander, the historical name for the today's Buyuk Menandres river in contemporary Turkey. The river Meander has many twists and was mentioned by Homer in the Iliad. The ceiling of the cave number 3 of Yulin complex has slightly modified version of the Meander motif. Both discussing the spread of Mahayana cults, before discussing the spread of Mahayana cults from India along the Silk Road, let me take one more example to show the Hellenistic inspiration on late mural paintings of the grottos of Dunghong. We all have heard of Ganesha, the Hindu patron god of arts and sciences. Ganesha has been represented with the head of an elephant and body of a human being since the early stages of his appearances in Indian art. The Puranic myths provide many explanations for how he got his elephant head. I know all of you know that, but I will just mention one. The most recurrent motif is in these stories is that Ganesha was born with a human head and body, and Shiva beheaded him when Ganesha came between Shiva and Parvati. Shiva then replaced Ganesha's original head, his own son, with that of an elephant. Respecting the Indian tradition, one of the earliest caves of Mogao grottos, complex number 285, constructed between 538 and 539, the two sons of Shiva, Kartikeya and Ganesha, are depicted on the wall close to the niche. However, the mural painting of Avalokiteshvara with 1,000 hands on the north wall of cave number 3 of the Mogao grotto in Dunhuang of the Yuan dynasty depicts very interesting figure of Ganesha. Instead of the elephant head, here we have a human-faced Ganesha, but wearing an elephant scalp. The elephant scalp, symbolizing the victory over the Indian king Porus, appeared for the first time on the gold medallion of Alexander the Great. Bactrian kings like Demetrius I, Lysias, imitated the Macedonian conqueror on their silver coinages. It seems that it was this iconography that has served as a prototype when the artists of Mogao grotto wished to portray the Indian god of intellect and wisdom. By the 5th century, Mahayana tendencies in Buddhism began to develop in India, and gradually the beliefs and iconographies traveled along the land and maritime silk roads. One of the culminating points was the veneration of Avalokiteshvara Ekadashamukha, or 11-headed Bodhisattva of compassion. One prominent Buddhist story tells that Avalokiteshvara, vowing never to rest until he had freed all sentient beings from samsara, the circle of rebirths. Despite strenuous effort, he realizes that still many unhappy beings were yet to be saved. After struggling to comprehend the needs of so many, his head splits into 11 pieces. Amitabha, his spiritual father, seeing his plight, gives him 11 heads with which to hear the cries of the suffering. Upon hearing these cries and comprehending them, Avalokiteshvara attempts to reach out to all those who needed aid, but found that his two arms shattered into pieces. Once again, Amitabha comes to his rescue and invests him with 1,000 arms with which to aid the sufferings of multitudes. The earliest known example of or depiction of Avalokiteshvara Ekadashamukha, or 11-headed Avalokiteshvara, is attested in the cave number 41 of the Canary Caves, located on the western outskirts of Mumbai or Bombay. 109 caves carved from the basalt, dating from the 1st century BCE to the date from the 1st century BCE to the 10th century CE. As epigraphical evidence show, these establishments were built by traders who were associated with many trade centers of Sopra, Kalyan, Nasik, Paitan, and Ujjain. This iconography traveled along the Silk Road. Mogao and Yulin caves have many depictions of Avalokiteshvara deriving from the Indian prototype, but with the face of time characterized by by additional heads and arms. Mogao Cave 35, dated to the period of 5 dynasties, depicts 11-headed Bodhisattva of compassion, holding in his 8 arms the sun, moon, trident, and treasure stick. Although only composed of 11 heads and 8 arms, the mural painting of the north wall of the Mogao Cave 76 has a symbolic image of 1,000-hand and 1,000-eye Avalokiteshvara. The main face has 3 eyes. Each palm of the 8 hands have a merciful eye. The 51-faced Guanyin Bodhisattva, another form of Avalokiteshvara, or the Bodhisattva of mercy, is depicted in paintings and reliefs on the south side of the east wall of cave number 3 at Yulin Grottos, constructed in the late Middle Western Shia dynasty. The 51 faces are shown in overlapping arrangement in 10 layers as a pagoda. 1,000 eyes and 1,000 hands here indicate very many eyes and hands instead of specific number. Many utensils are depicted to symbolize Guanyin's hands. Totally, 166 kinds of utensils are represented in the scene, which are in symmetrical distribution of both sides of Guanyin Bodhisattva. Amongst 41 utensils in hand are depicted according to Sutra, while the others according to living scenes in Western Shia dynasty, such as human figures, animals, plants, architectures, vehicles, productive implements, musical instruments, measures, or weapons, and Buddhist instruments. One of the most elaborate versions of the Avalokiteshvara Ekadashamukha, illuminated Avalokiteshvara, is the mural painting of this Bodhisattva of compassion with 1,000 hands on the north wall of the cave number 3 of the Mogawa Grottos, dated to the Yuan dynasty that we have seen already. The heads are arranged into 3 rows, one above each other, respectively consisting 3, 7, and 1 head from the top down. A pair of hands clasps in front of the breast. A second pair is holding a treasured bowl below, and the third pair is holding an incarnated Buddha over his head, and the other remaining hands hold nothing. The remaining small hands are arranged in 4 circles around the big hands. As discussed, the iconography first appeared in India in a relatively simple form, has developed in complex forms, respecting the heart Dharani of the Avalokiteshvara Ekadashamukha Sutra, first translated from Sanskrit into Chinese in 656 CE, until it reached Japan and Kanon Bosatsu in Japan. Let me now discuss this last, one more important Mahayana iconography of Avalokiteshvara, originated in Indian Maharashtra and later traveled along the land Silk Road. I have discussed elsewhere that the spread of Buddhism in South and Southeast Asia is closely connected with the growth of the maritime and fluvial networks. Their wealth was based on the flourishing inland and international trade centers located in ports along the coast and navigable rivers. As I can remember, Professor Luke Lancaster, who gave a talk last fall, pointed out that fluvial transportation in the ancient world was less dangerous and less expensive than the land routes. I'm just giving you some photographs taken in the 19th century, how Sri Lanka was colonized by the British. The 2 techniques they used, one is the land route, which is more expensive and demanded much labor, and the second one was to use the rivers and transport tea to the Colombo harbor. All the Gandharan Buddhist sites were built around the upper Indus River and its tributaries, the Kabul and the Swat rivers. The vast Buddhist complexes of North India like Mathura, Vaishali, Sarnath, Nalanda, and Bodh Gaya are situated either in the vicinity of the Ganges or its tributaries like the Yamuna and Neranjana rivers. Buddhist sites of the Satavahana and Ishwaku periods like Amaravati, Nagarjunakonda, Granthashala, Jakapetya in Andhra Pradesh are located along the Krishna River. Nearly 3,000 stupas and monasteries were built in Bagan or Pagan in the left bank of the Irrawaddy River in Burma. The prosperity and duration of these monastic sites depended mainly on the dynamism or dynamics of maritime and fluvial trade network, because traders as major donors played an immeasurable role in the spread of Buddhism and the construction of monastic complexes. Only the widespread and gigantic Buddhist cave complexes of Deccan Plateau in Maharashtra are an exception, because the traders who sponsored these sumptuous dwellings of the Buddhist monks followed land route. The Western Ghats being too close to the littoral, there aren't major rivers fall into the Arabian Sea. Instead, they all flow eastward. Among them, Godavari and Krishna rivers hold an important place. The reputation of Avalokiteshvara offering protection to the traders taking the perilous land routes gained much popularity in Buddhist cave sculptures depicting Ashtamaha Abhaya or Avalokiteshvara, in which the Bodhisattva protecting human beings from 8 great perils. The most evocative sculpture of the so-called Litany of Avalokiteshvara or Ashtamahabhaya follow in the narration in the Saddharma Pundarika Sutra or the Sutra of the White Lotus of the Sublime Dharma is one carved at the left side of the sanctum of cave number 7 in Aurangabad. On this panel, Avalokiteshvara with the lotus in the left hand and his right hand making the Abhay Mudra is shown protecting his devotees from the following dangers. If you read clockwise, the enraged animals, so what you see here, behind the kneeling couple, a lion with the raised left foreleg. Poisonous reptiles, behind the kneeling couple, 2 cobras with rear up hoods. Wild beasts, behind the imploring couple, an elephant emerging from the jungle. Evil spirits or demons, in front of a demoniac figure, perhaps a mother holding a child seated next to a standing man. Shipwreck, 2 men and probably a woman sailing a ship with 2 masts. Captivity and slavery, an image partly broken behind 2 male figures. Sword of the enemy, behind a couple in distress, one carrying goods on the head, a man threatening with a sword, and finally, from the devouring fire, in front of the blazing flame, a pleading couple. The fear of the unknown in foreign lands gave birth to the legends of ferocious yakshas, rakshas, and pretas, some type of demons. The sculptures depicting Ashtamahabhaya evokes the dangerous land routes. The Buddhist iconographies left by trader donors, after all, appear for the protection from the Blessed One to reach their home safely. I believe these iconographies represent an essential part of land route or land trade that we seem to forget quite often. The traders traversing the Gobi Desert with harsh climatic conditions and facing sandstorms blowing with strong winds certainly would have prayed to Avalokiteshvara, who granted them a secure voyage. Apart from that, the snow leopards, brown bears, and wolves threatened the lives of the caravaniers. Mural paintings depicting Avalokiteshvara protecting traders from various kinds of perils are numerous in cave complexes along the Silk Road. I shall discuss 2 such depictions. The cave number 420 of Magavok Grottos, constructed in the Sui dynasty and partly repainted in the Song and Western Shia dynasties, has a truncated pyramidal ceiling and niche, and in each of the south, west, and north walls. One of these walls is shown how Bodhisattva of compassion rescue countless beings from all kinds of dangers. A caravan is attacked by a group of bandits, but is saved by Avalokiteshvara by calling upon his name. If one falls into the river or water, a deep river, will turn into a shallow one as long as he calls Avalokiteshvara's name. If a ship caught in a turbulent storm at sea, chanting the name of Avalokiteshvara will appease the perilous waves. The second example that I have selected is a mural painting from the Mogao Cave, number 14, dated to the late Tang Dynasty. A man running to escape from an enraged animal, it could most probably be a snow leopard. A trader threatened by a group of bandits. An evil spirit or a demon intimidating a helpless man. A man in the middle of towering fire. A ship with 4 sailors caught in a turbulent storm at sea. Likewise, Avalokiteshvara, who gained much popularity from the 6th century CE as the protector of seagoing sailors and traders traversing perilous land roads, was venerated both in India and China. The stories behind these depictions are Indian, but artistic rendering of these narrations is Chinese. In the process of executing these narrative images, artists seem to have exercised a certain liberty. In this setting, the Indian iconographies are not simply copied and pasted, but restructured in a Chinese context. Once restructured, the visualization of the Indian story changes, making the Silk Road art a unique mode of expression. In order to develop this singularity, let me take one last example. If we take into consideration what is narrated in the sacred Buddhist text, very particularly the Lalitavistara, it is said the Bodhisattva Gautama entered through his mother's right side in the form of a baby elephant, white in color with 6 tusks. As this occurred, Queen Maya was sleeping on her pleasant bed. All Indian art schools faithfully depict this event, and this is from Bharut. You can see a huge elephant, although it's a baby elephant, entering the womb of Mahamaya. And this one is from Amaravati, now in the Indian Museum of Calcutta. You can see a small elephant, I have colored it, entering the womb. And from Gandhara, of course, with an Ambet elephant entering the womb. But if you look at Dongong painting, the north part of the ceiling above the niche of the west wall of Mogao Cave, number 329, going against the Indian tradition, depicts the Bodhisattva entering the womb of his mother, riding on an elephant. Completely new invention. So, to conclude the first talk, during the second talk, I wish to show furthermore how the original Indian and Iranian motifs were reconstructed or restructured and reinterpreted in a cross-cultural context when they travel in space and time along the Silk Roads to Buddhist centers in distant lands. I thank you very much. Sure. Although some motifs as well as stories have originated in Central Asia and Gandhara regions, as they travel in space and time along the Silk Roads to the Buddhist centers in distant lands, have developed in a cross-fertilized context. In order to demonstrate this point, I have selected one motif, the beriband diadem, also known as fluttering ribbons or flying streamers, emanating behind the heads of the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, gods, nobles, and traders on the paintings of Bamiyan in Afghanistan, Kisil Caves in Xinjiang, and Dungong in northwestern Gansu province. This iconography became very popular under the Sasanians known as Karahe. As we shall discuss later, the diadem with flying ribbons on the coins of Ardashir I and his successor Lakshapur I were among many types of iconographies popular during the Sasanian period. The word diadem derives from the Greek word diadema, meaning band or fillet, from the diadeo, the verb, I bind round or I fasten. Traditionally, the diadem was tied in the back with a reef, square knot, and the long ends, which we call the fanons, left hanging down, sometimes even to the wearer's shoulders. Exactly which ancient culture introduced the diadem remains unclear, but by the late 9th century BCE, Neo-Assyrian kings were wearing a ribbon around the base of their turbans. For example, on the relief from Royal Palace of Nimrud, dated to the 8th century BCE, the Assyrian king Tukul-Apil-Eshara III receives homage from 3 courtiers wearing a tall headdress from which emanate long ribbons. A helmet warrior prostrates himself at the king's feet. The practice wearing royal diadem was adopted by the subsequent Persian kings. There was hardly any difference between the Greek wreath, which had become a symbol of semi-divine monarchy, and the oriental diadem, which the Greeks believed to be the symbol of divine monarchy. It comes as no surprise that Alexander the Great, after he had defeated his opponent Darius III in 330 BCE, started to wear a diadem. This was in accordance with the Eastern practices, which allowed important people to tie their hair with a diadem. In the West, it had been used to imply divinity. According to Quintus Curtius Rufus, a Roman historian, probably of the 1st century, Alexander the Great adopted in 330 a purple diadem variegated with white, like the one Darius had worn. If you believe the narration of the Anabasis of Alexander, written by Arrian of Nicomedia, which is slightly different from the version given by Aristobulus, Alexander was sailing in the marshlands near Babylon. The king's cosia, I have put here on the top, cosia with the attached diadem was blown off and was carried out onto the reeds. A sailor who swam to fetch the diadem bound it around his head so that to avoid soaking the headband in the water. According to Arrian, many historians of Alexander said that the king, meaning Alexander, gave the sailor a talent. A talent means in Attic weight, it's about 26 kilograms of coins of silver, but orders his decapitation, since his puppets felt that the head that had worn the royal diadem should be cut off. As correctly concluded by Andrew W. Collins in his recent article, The Royal Costume and Insignia of Alexander the Great, We should see in this story a strong evidence that the diadem was the main royal insignia of Alexander the Great by 323 when he died. It seems that Alexander, who was, after all, the son of Ammon, had horns attached to his diadem. These are the horns of Ammon. Alexander's habit of dressing as Ammon is related to the oracle of Shiva, which made him to believe in his divine sonship. The practice of wearing diadem made of ribbons continued in Central Asia and Gandhara, as attested by the coins portraits issued by the successors of Alexander the Great in these regions. For example, I am showing a coin of Eucratides, coin of Antimachus I, coin of Archibius, Philoxenus, Agathocles, and Demetrius. The Greek diadem was first replaced in Gandhara by Kanishka's son, Huishka. On one of his gold series, we see the numbered and diadem half-length bust of Huishka, facing head left, holding a mace scepter in the right hand, and in the left, a filleted spear over the shoulder. The king is wearing a richly decorated helmet with cheek piece adorned with the fluttering ribbons falling on his shoulders. Compared to the Greek diadem, these ribbons are corrugated. In other words, they have a series of parallel ridges or furrows. On this Gandharan relief, the center figure is standing Bodhisattva, shown taller than the other figures. He is Maitreya because, though broken, the traces of the Kamandalu, or the sacrificial water flask, the attribute par excellence of Maitreya, held with the left hand, can be detected. On the right of the Bodhisattva, a diadem and crowned king, clad in royal dress, facing head turned towards the noble being, I mean Maitreya, takes with his right hand a handful of flowers from a bowl held by a noble wearing a Phrygian cap. The royalty of the worshipper, in contrast to the other three venerators, is indicated by the mantle fastened over the chest with fibula and the richly decorated helmet-like crown. The king in question is again Huishka, as his crown and dress are quite similar to the ones worn by the same king on his coins. Like on coins, the fluttering ribbons emerging under the headgear fall on his shoulders. The Sasanian successors of Kushans in Gandhara and also Central Asia believed that Shara, symbolized by the diadem of kinship, was divinely conferred, thus consecrating each monarch's rule. Monumental rock reliefs played a unique role in the formation of early Sasanian kinship. Sasanian reliefs often portrayed triumph and divine investiture in some sort of combination with each other. Sasanian reliefs depict Ahura Mazda investing the ruler by handing him a Beriban diadem which is long enough to fall almost to the waist. In the investiture relief at Nashirustam, Ahura Mazda hands the Beriban diadem to Ardashir I. This highly innovative and powerful composition elegantly and forcefully proclaim the Sasanian king or Sasanian ideology of divinity or divinely inspired kinship and irresistible victory. The triumph of Shapur I at Nashirustam portrays the defeat of two Roman emperors, Gordian III and Philippus Arab or Philip Arab. Once again, the Sasanian king is shown wearing high tiara, decorated with fluttering ribbons. The crowning ceremony of Shapur II in the presence of Mitra is another good example. The fallen Roman Emperor Julianus Apostata is humiliated. Julianus' Persian War, or the Persian-Roman War, was the last undertaking of the Roman Emperor, began in March 363. It was an aggressive war against the Persian Empire ruled by the Sasanian king Shapur II. Sasanian kings mounted on horses and hunting diverse animals are depicted on plates and bowls wearing such floating ornaments or streamers. Though the identity of the Sasanian king hunting rams on this plate is uncertain, his crown identifies him as Peros or Kawad I. The Ufa plate, depicting a Sasanian king hunting mountain sheep, now in the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. The silver gilt plate depicting most probably Ardashir I hunting wild boars discovered in Afghanistan, now in a private collection, and the silver gilt plate in the in Smithsonian's Sackler Gallery of Asian art depicting a king on horseback aiming an arrow at a fleeing wild boar are three more examples to demonstrate the importance given to the divine diadem. A gilded bronze pectoral that you are seeing for the first time, collar necklace depicting Buddhas and Bodhisattvas found presumably in the Salt Range in Pakistan that I have published recently, enable us to understand the role played by the fluttering streamers in Indian iconography. It was found with a hoard containing 17 silver coins of the Han king Mihirakula. If we adapt the latest chronology proposed by Michael Alram, the reign of Mihirakula should be dated circa 515 to 540 CE. Likewise, the pectoral would be dated approximately in the same period or some decades before or after Mihirakula. Mihirakula was one of the latest Alkan kings who put an end to the domination of Sasanian in Kabulistan, who were also deeply rooted in Gandhara and Taxila regions. Contrary to John Marshall's description of the Hephthalites sweeping over Gandhara and Punjab, carrying ruin and desolation wherever they went, Shoshin Koyama has argued, I quote, "The Hephthalites' destruction of Buddhism and Buddhist temples was a sheer conjecture." End of quotation. Furthermore, based on a copper scroll inscription from the time of the Alkan Hans, Gudrun Melzer argued, I quote, "Although the long-held opinion of the Hans' cruelty and destruction of the Buddhist monasteries lasts still today," I think people still believe the Hans destroyed Buddhism, our copper scroll documenting the building of a stupa, together with the Kura inscription documenting the erection of a monastery, clearly show that under the rule of these Han Buddhists, buildings were erected. End of quotation. The iconography of the pectoral shows the cross-fertilization of different cultures in these regions, such as Gandharan art, Sasanian art, and Chinese Central Asian art. As we know, the Gandharan art has its turn characteristic borrowings from Indian, Greco-Roman, Scythian, and Persian arts. The Sasanian art has resulted from the interactions between ancient Near Eastern and Greco-Roman world. the Chinese Central Asian art, which itself was partly inspired by Indian, Bactrian, and Sogdian art. The pectoral under discussion may have been originally placed around the neck of a Bodhisattva image as a decorative piece, as we can see on the beautiful bust of Bodhisattva Maitreya from Gandhara, now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Each end of the ornament has a symmetrical and identical design composed of stylized wavy spirals imitating wheels of water. These are reminiscence of Gandharan prototypes which produce the scroll pattern inspired by the acanthus leaf motifs used extensively in the art and architecture of ancient Greece and Rome, which are transmitted to the cave decorations of Kisil and Dunghong. Here we can see some examples from the cave number 14 of the Mogao cave at Dunghong of the late Tang period. Starting from the end, the water wheels, the seated Buddhas are depicted on either side. They are followed by two Bodhisattvas, one on each side, who is in turn are flanked by Buddhas in the same disposition. Three Buddhas on the left side of the pectoral keep the palm on the right hand turned towards the right shoulder. Maurizio Taddei identified this exceptional gesture as the mudra of respect or compassion, and it can be seen in some sculptures of Gandharan art during the Kushana period. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are shown seated in Padmasana or lotus position or the cross leg on the pistil of a full-blown lotus with inverted petals. All the Buddhas wear a samgati overrobe and crown covers both shoulders and has a wide semi-circular neckline. The facial expressions of the Buddhas betray the Gandharan prototypes and remind us of the Shinkyon models. Bodhisattva holding a lotus in the left hand, placed in between two Buddhas, could be Padmapani Avalokiteshvara. In spite of the absence of the image of the seated meditating Amitabha Buddha on the turban crest, one may assume that he is Avalokiteshvara thanks to the full-bloomed lotus that he is holding in stem in his left arm. Plus, there is a long garland passing over his lap and around his elbows, which is another characteristic of Avalokiteshvara in the 6th century images of him in Gandhara and Kashmir. The identification of the second Bodhisattva seated in Dhyana Mudra remains raises problems because of the lack of attributes. Looking at the lavish jewelry he wears, one may think of Manjushri, the Bodhisattva associated with Prajna, the insight, in Mahayana Buddhism. I have proposed to identify the Buddha seated to the left-hand side of the central figure as Gautama Buddha, who shows with his right hand Maitreya as his successor. The one to his right, making Abhay Mudra, is most probably Maitreya, who is mentioned in early Buddhist texts as the Bodhisattva who will appear on earth in the future to achieve complete enlightenment and teach the pure Dharma or the teaching. According to the Mahavastu, Buddha says, as Kashyapa proclaims him as his successor, I, who am Sakyamuni, have proclaimed Maitreya. The most remarkable characteristic of this iconography of the pectoral is the fluttering streamers emanating behind the heads of the Bodhisattvas and also hanging from the chhatra above the head. We have already seen the popularity and the symbolism of the diadem with fluttering streamers in Sasanian iconographies. By the 5th century CE, these motifs were diffused widely in Buddhist iconographies along the Silk Roads to the extent that the divine royal symbolism got lost in translation over the space and time. This is what we are going to examine now. In Ajanta, the most famous painting in this context is the drinking scene on the ceiling of the cave number 1. If we follow the hypothesis put forward by Monica Sin, Kubera, as one of Chaturamaha that means 4 guardians of the world, or the 4 directions or 4 cardinal points, and the king of the northern quarters is dressed in Persian garb and shown in the center holding a cup with 5 attendants and at his service. Kubera, who is none other than a Sogdian merchant, imposing his selfie, and 2 women in his left wear fluttering ribbons, probably attached to the round caps with an inverted edge. 2 important Bodhisattva images adorned with fluttering streamers were recently found in the monastic complex of Messainak in Afghanistan. As we all know by now, Messainak is the site of 40 kilometers, 25 miles, southeast of Kabul, which has country's largest copper deposit, as well as the remains of an ancient settlement with 400 Buddhist statues, stupas, and 100 acres monastic complex. The first image is of the Bodhisattva Siddhartha Gautama, who stands frontally. From the Jata Makuta, or the headdress, decorated with strings of beads enhanced with circular motif, with a jewel in the center, emerge from either side of the head 2 fluttering ribbons falling over the shoulders. The second sculpture is of the same Bodhisattva seated in Lalitasana under the Bodhi tree, accompanied by Buddhist monks to his right holding a bowl. From a more elaborate turban or jata, 2 similar fluttering streamers appear from either side on the head and fall over the shoulders. These statues show, without any doubt, the popularity of fluttering ribbons during this period and their association with Bodhisattva images. In this precise context, the pictorial under discussion depicting the 3 Bodhisattvas wearing fluttering ribbons, popularized by the Sasanians, is not unique. The depictions relevant to our pictorial are also attested by the mural paintings in the caves of Bamyan and Kakrak. We have already seen the sun god, a synchronized image symbolizing the Greek Helios, Iranian Mitra, painted in the niche located directly over the 38-meter Buddha. He wears fluttering ribbons floating against the blue sky. Transgrone assimilates Athena of Delbergin with the Iranian goddess of justice, Arshad. The temple was constructed during the Kushano-Sasanian period, 3rd and 4th century CE. The ribbons float upward, as on the pictorial are to be noted. Along the Karakorum highway in Gilgit in Pakistan, which was one of the major access to Tashkurgan, many petroglyphs depict stupas decorated with fluttering streamers. During the break, one of the gentlemen in the audience came to me and said he took this route through Gilgit to Kashgar. And this was a famous route towards China. The one we have already discussed, portraying the Sipijataka, is one of them. An inscription studied by Nicholas Sims Williams, refers to a certain Sogdian, I quote, Nanai Vandak, the son of Narisaf, came here either in the day or the year 10th, and have requested the favor from the spirit of the sacred place that I reach Karavandan, mean Tashkurgan, very fast to see my dear brother in good health. End of quotation. No wonder why so many iconographies were transmitted to Kizil by Sogdian merchants. The letters also published by Sims Williams show the importance of family ties with trading communities. These communities are mostly made up of merchants and caravaniers. The mention of a priest in letter 1, line 10, suggests that Sogdian community of Dunghong was large enough to have a place of worship. Let us now examine how the fluttering ribbons motif was adapted by Kizil and Dunghong painters when portraying different Buddhist stories. As a decorated wall of the Kizil cave number 60 had two beriband birds enclosed in a pearl roundel and holding jewel pendant in their beak. A dancing princess, Chandraprabha, of the Kizil cave Kizil cave 83 has the characteristic of her Indo-Sasanian counterparts. Her dancing posture, articulated by the position of the legs and the gentle déhanchement, the swaying of the hips, the flexibility of the body, is intensified by the long Sasanian ribbons with a series of parallel ridges. This refinement of the female body is also attested in Indian art, very particularly in Ajanta paintings of the same chronological period. As we shall see later, or in a while, it is this female beauty, rendered by slim and flexible body, that was transmitted to Dunghong. As we have seen, the most prominent image of the pectoral wearing a crown and sitting under the chatra parasol adorned with fluttering ribbons is Bodhisattva Maitreya. Since the central figure represents Maitreya and not Padmapani Avalokiteshvara, the configuration of the pectoral cannot stand for Sukhavati paradise. It is known that Avalokiteshvara, the spiritual son of Amitabha, who is deemed to be the Buddha, presides over the Western Pure Lands, waiting for the turn to come to the earthly realm to attain Buddhahood. Since the iconographic program is centered on Maitreya, it is most plausible that we are dealing with Tusita heaven. As we have seen earlier, according to the Lalita Vistara, the Bodhisattva, future Sakyamuni Buddha, is just about to leave Tusita heaven when he designated Maitreya to be the next enlightened Buddha. As stated in Mahavastu, I quote, "Exalted Buddhas do not pass away until they have anointed a heir to the throne. He will become a Buddha in the world immediately after me. As I now proclaim of Maitreya, he will become the Buddha next after me." End of quotation. The Bamiyan, Kizil and Dunghong mural paintings have portrayed many images of Maitreya residing in the heavens. The painting from the cave 38, known as the Cave of Musicians, the carbon 14 dating of which is 428 to 535, depicts Maitreya with attendants residing in the Tusita heaven. Emerging from his crown, 4 ribbons, 2 on either side, flutter in the air. The mural painting from the cave number 224, also in the Berlin collection, may represent Maitreya in the Ketumati performing the Abhay Mudra. It is believed once Maitreya becomes a Buddha, he will rule over the Ketumati Pure Land, an earthly paradise. Once again, he is depicted almost like a Sasanian monarch. The Kisil artists and their sponsors were likely instructed by erudite monks who knew about the importance of the Bodhisattva Maitreya as the fully enlightened Buddha to be. There are numerous paintings at Bamiyan depicting the Bodhisattva Maitreya wearing a crown with attached fluttering ribbons. Perhaps the most significant depiction of Maitreya comes from the niche E, situated about 50 meters to the west of the 38-meter Buddha. As described by Deborah Klimberg-Salter, I quote, "Because of the subtle blend of colors and the dramatic style, the painting of the Bodhisattva Maitreya on the soffit has come to be known as Beau Bodhisattva." Beau in French means beautiful Bodhisattva. End of quotation. The Bodhisattva wear three distinct types of necklaces. From the crown, fluttering ribbons float stiffly upward from rosette. The Bodhisattva Maitreya from the cave K3 at Bamiyan also has similar types of ribbons floating behind his head. The ribbons undulating from the headgear of the Bodhisattva, listening to the preaching of the Buddha in Mogawo Cave 272 in Dungong, are somewhat abstract compared to the original Sasanian prototype. The Bodhisattva musicians playing lute and blowing into the conch shell of the cave 435 enhance the rhythmic movement of the body. The three noble worshippers, the Bodhisattva of the cave 285, wear crowns with ribbons floating in the air. The sun god, or Surya, and their retinue, the god Vishnu Narayana, and his entourage on the south wall of the south end of the west wall of the cave 285 of the West Wei dynasty of the Mogawa complex, wear stylized fluttering ribbons emanating from their respective crowns. Narayana, or Vishnu, with 3 heads and 6 arms, holding the attributes of Vishnu such as the conch and chakra, has undulating ribbons flying in the air. The painting narrating the Ruru Jataka, or the tale of the deer of 9 colors, in the west mural of cave 245 has the image of a king on horseback going in search of the deer, wearing fluttering ribbons attached to the crown. The composition of the horse and the king with the flying sashes, synchronized with the floating ribbons, are remarkable artistic achievements. Flying apsaras, or celestial beings, of the cave 249 and 285, dated to the first half of the 6th century CE, manifest the stylization of the drapery, long flying sashes and long undulating ribbons floating in the wind in harmony with their corporeal movement. Likewise, compared to the iconographies of Kisil as a whole, those of Dungong of the 5th and 6th centuries are characterized by the slender and graceful human bodies dressed in loose attire with big sleeves and long flying sashes. The fluttering ribbons continue to adorn the Bodhisattva images painted on the murals of cave number 3 of the Yulin complex, dated to the Western Shia period of the 11th, 12th and 13th centuries. This cave, with the diversified contents and art of both exotic and esoteric Buddhism, supported respectively by Chinese and Tibetans. It is most interesting or most representative cave with the most natural and unique art. I wish to draw your attention to the beautiful paintings of Samantabhadra and Manjushri, attendant Bodhisattvas of Sakyamuni Buddha. The Bodhisattva Samantabhadra is usually on Buddha's right side, rides a white elephant, symbolizing the boundlessness of Buddhist Dharma or Buddhist teaching. He gracefully gazes at the world below him with his great compassion. The ribbons emanating from the lavish headdress float, synchronized with the sashes. Bodhisattva Manjushri rides a blue lion, embodying the determination and diligence required in practicing Buddhism. His solemn and tranquil posture artfully balances the fierceness of the lion. Once again, the fluttering ribbons and sashes move harmoniously in the air, making the painting, like the previous one, a unique composition in terms of its content and style. In order to conclude, let me point out that by the 5th century CE, these motifs were diffused widely in Buddhist iconographies to the extent that the divine royal symbolism of the Greeks and Persians lost its specific signification with the appearance of images of nobles, traders, celestial beings, and even animals wearing fluttering ribbons in many Buddhist paintings in India, Central Asia, and China. Although the first motifs have originated in Central Asian and Gandhara regions, as they travel in space and time along the Silk Roads to the Buddhist centers in distant lands, they developed in cross-fertilized contexts, ingeniously incorporating the sentiments and aesthetics of their respective populations, creating new forms of art that we call the Silk Road art. Thank you very much.